Emma had always known her home was a stage, where silence covered fractures too deep for daylight to touch. She learned early that danger moved quietly, slipping between breaths, waiting behind every polite smile Richard wore outside. Each night carved new marks into her memory. Turning fear into data, she organized like cold numbers on a hidden ledger. She counted footsteps, measured pauses, timed the rise of his voice as if calculations could shield her from the impact. Her mother never spoke, never ran, never lifted her eyes long enough to admit what they both endured in shadows. Emma thought silence was armor, a thin shell that kept the world from collapsing faster than she could stand. But on the night his rage crossed her face like a verdict, she understood silence was no longer survival but surrender. The night began in the quiet way storms often do, with tension settling into corners no one dared to acknowledge. Emma entered the living room and felt the air thicken, as if the walls braced for impact before she did. Richard stood near the window, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, already searching for something to break. His anger was never random, but it never needed a reason either, only a spark disguised as a question. He asked why dinner was late, why the lights were dim, why the house felt wrong, why Emma was even standing there. His voice rose in sharp waves, each word slicing the room into pieces too small for comfort or logic. Her mother hovered near the kitchen doorway, hands twisting into each other, eyes begging Emma not to respond. This was the choreography they knew. He shouted, they shrank, silence filled the rest like a binding contract. Emma felt the familiar urge to catalog his behavior, to map patterns like a scientist observing a volatile threat. She noticed the way his fists opened and closed, the uneven rhythm of his breathing, the twitch at his temple. She knew these signals, knew they led down only one path, knew the ending before the first line was spoken. But what she didn't know was how quickly the moment would turn, how abruptly the mask would fall from his face. Richard stepped closer, demanding an answer she didn't owe him, demanding compliance she no longer intended to give. Her silence enraged him more, twisting his features into something that barely resembled the man the world admired. He reached for her arm, fingers digging into her skin like he wanted to leave a mark she couldn't deny. Her mother whispered his name, soft and shaking, but the sound vanished before reaching him or changing anything. The next second shattered the air. The slap landed so hard Emma tasted metal before she tasted fear. She didn't fall, but the room spun, colors bleeding into each other like paint swirling down a drain. Her mother gasped, but didn't move, as if rooted to the floor by years of practiced helplessness. Richard stepped back, chest heaving, waiting for her to apologize for provoking him, waiting for the script to continue. But Emma didn't apologize, didn't lower her eyes, didn't swallow the rising heat in her chest this time. She saw her mother trembling behind him, lips pressed together, shoulders curled forward as if protecting invisible bruises. Emma understood something final in that moment, something that hollowed her out and filled her with clarity at once. Silence was no longer a shield. It was a prison built from routines she never agreed to live within. She straightened her spine, even as her cheek throbbed, even as her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Richard mistook her stillness for compliance, unaware that something irreversible had shifted in the room. Emma stepped back without fear, without apology, without the weight that had chained her since childhood. The truth pressed against her ribs like a new rhythm, steady and impossible to ignore now that it had begun. She realized tonight was the line she would never cross again, the moment she refused to vanish into silence. Richard didn't know it, her mother didn't know it, but Emma did. The cycle ended the second she stood her ground. And though the room remained still, something inside her had already started moving, unstoppable, toward the future he couldn't control. Emma left the house before sunrise, moving through the cold air with a clarity that felt carved from stone. Her cheek still pulsed from the hit, but the pain only reminded her of what she refused to accept anymore. She reached the office early, long before security changed shifts, long before questions could drift toward her bruises. The halls were dim and hollow, echoing the silence of a company built on polished lies and quiet corruption. Emma logged in with her old credentials, expecting them to fail, but someone had forgotten to erase her entirely. She took it as a challenge, a dare, an open door she intended to walk through before anyone noticed. Liam arrived 20 minutes later, yawning and clutching a thermos, unaware she had been waiting at his desk. His eyes widened when he saw her face, but she shook her head quickly, refusing sympathy before it formed. She told him she needed access, deep access, past the layers she used to monitor, down to the code they hid. Liam hesitated only a moment, because he knew Emma never asked for anything without reason or precision. He opened a backdoor script he had built for diagnostics, something not meant for her, but perfect for what she needed. The gateway unfolded like a map of buried decisions, a tangle of numbers and systems ordinary employees never saw. Emma navigated it with the muscle memory of someone who had lived inside these structures longer than she realized. She found the Helios directory first, a cluster of green check marks glowing far too confidently for a troubled build. She clicked the most recent entry and felt her pulse shift when the logs contradicted the status on the surface. Someone had forced a successful flag on a failed compilation, a manipulation obvious to anyone who understood the code. And she did understand, deeply, because she had written most of the compliance protocols they were now violating. Emma scrolled further, her breath thinning as she found the edits to her own reports, lines removed with surgical intent. Paragraphs she had written with caution and integrity were sliced apart, replaced with diluted phrases to mask risk. She recognized Kyle's digital signature, a careless stamp that revealed more arrogance than technical skill. But arrogance was not the worst part. It was the motive behind it that ignited something sharp inside her. The bonus structure appeared in an email chain, tying Helios's launch date to payouts larger than annual salaries. Every alteration, every deletion, every forced status now aligned with a financial reward they counted on securing. Emma saved everything, creating layers of encrypted copies, ensuring the truth couldn't vanish the way she once had. Each file felt like a piece of her own history being restored, a system she finally had power to expose. She compiled screenshots, logs, timestamps, edits, authorization mismatches, every thread leading back to Richard and Kyle. The story unfolded like a crime she had been destined to uncover, one she had unknowingly lived within for years. Liam watched in silence as she organized the evidence, recognizing a resolve he had never seen from her before. When she titled the final document, Helios Internal Integrity Audit, the room felt charged with a new certainty. Emma knew this audit was not just about a project or a company, but about reclaiming the voice she lost. She closed the last window, steady and unwavering, ready for the war she had already begun. Emma arrived at the town hall hours before anyone else, carrying a calm she had not felt in years. The room smelled of polished wood and fresh carpet, a stage set for corporate pleasantries, not revelations. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her hair, and tucked the bruises under a careful layer of makeup. Liam sat nearby, laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard like a pianist waiting for the right moment. Emma handed him the final script, a sequence designed to activate at the precise phrase they had identified. "Risk control is 0, she whispered once, and Liam nodded, confirming the timing down to the millisecond. Every chair in the hall filled slowly, employees chatting, unaware that the calm surface hid a storm beneath. Richard entered last, confident, smiling, adjusting his tie as though the world belonged entirely to him. He greeted the executives, shook hands, laughed at jokes, all the while unaware that his secrets were about to unravel. Emma's pulse was steady, her eyes fixed on the stage, tracking his every movement, every pause, every word. The first part of the meeting went as expected. Updates, graphs, a veneer of productivity masking internal decay. She could feel the weight of months of preparation pressing against her ribs, ready to explode into reality. The room dimmed slightly as Richard stepped to the podium, clearing his throat, projecting authority he no longer deserved. Emma signaled Liam with a subtle tilt of her head. He nodded and watched the script ready in the background. He would not intervene until the exact moment, until the trigger phrase left Richard's mouth without hesitation. Richard began his speech, praising the team, emphasizing risk management, unaware of the trap poised to strike. Emma's fingers rested lightly on her lap, mind rehearsing the sequence one last time, counting breaths between words. Then he said it, as casually as ever, "Risk control is 0, the phrase carrying arrogance and ignorance in equal measure. Liam hit the enter key, and the system responded immediately, an invisible hand releasing the hidden evidence. The audio played over the speakers, voices unmistakable, the conversation Richard and Kyle had tried to bury. The room froze, mouths opening, phones lifting, eyes widening as the truth crashed into every corner of the hall. Employees murmured, some standing, others frozen, as the magnitude of betrayal sank in layer by layer. Richard's face changed from pride to confusion, then to panic, as the evidence enveloped him like a wave he could not escape. Emma remained seated, expression neutral, allowing the storm to reveal itself fully before any reaction could dilute it. Liam monitored the network, ensuring the clip reached every screen, every connection, leaving no room for denial. Messages pinged, alerts lit up, emails forwarded automatically, the story spreading faster than anyone could control. Sabrina's call came through, voice sharp, accusing, confused, but Emma did not answer, letting the moment speak louder than words. Richard's hands trembled on the podium, his empire collapsing in real time, every lie exposed before his team and the press. Emma's heart did not race. It moved with a precision earned from years of observation, calculation, and endurance. She knew the moment had arrived, the setup complete, the trap sprung, and the truth now uncontainable. For the first time, she felt the power of her voice, the weight of her evidence, and the inevitability of justice unfolding. The moment the audio played, the room shifted, like the air had suddenly thickened with shock and disbelief. Richard froze at the podium, eyes darting to the screens, realizing too late that control had slipped from his hands. Voices from the hidden recording filled the hall, unmistakable, detailing schemes and manipulations he thought buried. Employees gasped, some whispering, some frozen, as the weight of betrayal settled over the audience like a storm. Cameras tilted, phones lifted, everyone capturing evidence that would spread faster than any official statement. Emails pinged instantly, the report Emma sent earlier propagating to inboxes she had targeted hours ago. Board members exchanged looks, murmurs of confirmation and shock moving quickly across the room like wildfire. Richard's composure crumbled, a mask of authority melting, revealing panic, shame, and disbelief in equal measure. Kyle Dre tried to speak, but the audio overpowered his words, leaving him stammering, trapped in the echo of his own deceit. Screens across the hall displayed the file, the conversations, the edits, the falsified reports, every lie laid bare. The room smelled faintly of fear and coffee, a strange mix that grounded the chaos in everyday reality. Sabrina's call rang again, sharp and accusing, her voice cracking with anger and confusion, demanding answers she could not comprehend. Emma ignored the phone, focusing on the faces around her, watching recognition, betrayal, and understanding ripple through the crowd. News outlets began live updates, the footage already leaking online, headlines forming faster than any press release. Richard stepped back, hands shaking, his carefully constructed empire of influence beginning to fracture in real time. Board members pulled out tablets and laptops, cross-referencing the audio with internal reports, each connection undeniable. Employees murmured among themselves, some nodding, some visibly trembling, absorbing the weight of what they had ignored. Emma remained seated, calm, composed, letting the evidence speak louder than any confrontation could. She noted the reactions, each flicker of recognition, each falter of loyalty, a record of how power had truly shifted. The clip ended, but the impact lingered, like a bell tolling that could not be silenced or ignored. Richard's face drained of color, his jaw tight, the realization of exposure pressing down like a physical weight. He tried to regain control, but every attempt faltered under the collective gaze of staff, media, and board members alike. Sabrina's voice had faded, but the accusation still hung in the air, a mix of blame and incomprehension aimed at Emma. The press crowded in, capturing every movement, every reaction, every falter, broadcasting the collapse worldwide. Emma exhaled slowly, allowing herself a fraction of satisfaction, knowing months of preparation had led to this exact moment. Richard's chair scraped the floor as he moved back, eyes wild, realizing his power was gone, his influence evaporated. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his confidence shattered, facing the undeniable proof of his involvement and complicity. Employees began murmuring more openly, some recording, some sharing quietly, the truth no longer hidden behind polite smiles. Emma's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on her mother, who watched silently, witnessing the end of years of fear and silence. Richard's voice cracked when he finally tried to speak, pleading, explaining, denying, but the evidence drowned every word. The hall was still, a collective intake of breath, absorbing the magnitude of exposure and the collapse of authority. Emma leaned back, steady, knowing the moment was complete, the truth unleashed, and justice in motion. The board convened immediately after the town hall, the room thick with tension and whispered speculation. Richard entered reluctantly, shoulders hunched, aware that every eye in the room measured his fall. Documents, screenshots, and recordings sat on the table, laid out like undeniable evidence of misconduct. Board members exchanged glances, nodding quietly, confirming what the audio and audit had already made clear. Richard tried to speak, his voice shaky, attempting to justify actions that now appeared reckless and self-serving. Every explanation faltered, every excuse collided with the chain of evidence meticulously compiled by Emma. The chair of the board leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice firm, demanding answers that Richard could not supply. Minutes passed, each one heavier than the last, the weight of accountability pressing against him like steel. He gestured toward his defenses, but no one moved to support him, the loyalty he had counted on evaporating instantly. Emma observed silently, noting every reaction, every flicker of disbelief and guilt across the faces around the table. The mood shifted further when the CEO confirmed the audit's validity, nodding to the board that the evidence was unassailable. Richard's hands trembled as he reached for his glass of water, fingers brushing against the table as if seeking stability. The board began discussing the formal motion to remove him, procedural yet precise, leaving no room for negotiation. Richard stammered, attempting to protest, but the room was deaf to pleas, deaf to authority stripped of legitimacy. One by one, members voted, a chorus of decisive actions sealing his fate in the corporate hierarchy. The final count was unanimous. Richard Hale was officially removed from all positions immediately. A silence fell, broken only by the sound of his chair scraping back, the metallic echo emphasizing the gravity of loss. Emma's name surfaced next, her reinstatement proposed and confirmed, the room shifting focus from collapse to restoration. She accepted without a word, understanding the significance of returning not for vengeance, but for integrity. Richard remained standing, powerless, his image of control shattered in an instant, the empire he built crumbling around him. Kyle Dre sat quietly, head lowered, facing consequences without opportunity for defense or delay. Emma watched Richard gather his belongings, tie loose, caked makeup, a man reduced to the weight of exposure. The board finalized procedural documents, signatures flowing, ensuring no loophole could delay justice further. Richard's eyes flicked toward Emma, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and fleeting regret flashing across his features. She returned the gaze steadily, unshaken, grounded in the months of planning that led to this inevitable outcome. Kyle attempted a weak apology, but it fell flat, swallowed by the undeniable evidence and collective judgment. Emma's mother sat quietly in the corner, watching her daughter reclaim a position stolen, witnessing justice unfold. The hallways outside felt lighter, freer, as the news of the removal began to circulate among employees and staff. Emma felt the shift in atmosphere, a subtle exhale, as if the company itself was breathing for the first time in years. Richard's power evaporated, his aura of intimidation gone, leaving only the man and the record of his failings. Emma stood, calm and measured, knowing the work was not vengeance, but restoration of truth and safety. The board adjourned, voices softening, procedures complete, leaving Richard outside the walls of authority he once dominated. Emma's return marked a new chapter, a restored sense of order and morality in the company's leadership. Richard left quietly, every step echoing his fall, the room reclaiming itself from the shadow of his control. Emma remained, silent but resolute, understanding the battle was won, yet aware the responsibility to maintain integrity remained. The room had emptied of the chaos, leaving Emma and her mother alone among the echoes of confrontation and revelation. Her mother entered slowly, steps hesitant, eyes wide, carrying years of silence and unspoken fear with her. Emma turned slightly, meeting her gaze, seeing both relief and guilt reflected back in her mother's eyes. No words were spoken at first, only the quiet hum of the ventilation and the faint tapping of heels against the floor. Her mother stopped a few feet away, standing like a witness, neither defensive nor apologetic, simply present. Emma studied her carefully, noticing the tension in her shoulders had eased, the shoulders she had watched shrink for years. For the first time, she saw a woman who had survived fear without surrendering entirely, who had merely endured. Emma's heart thudded, a mixture of relief, recognition, and a tentative hope she hadn't allowed herself before. Her mother's lips parted slightly, then closed again, caught between the impulse to speak and the weight of past silence. Emma stepped forward, careful, measured, giving space but signaling that confrontation was over, and healing could begin. Her mother nodded subtly, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the truth Emma had spoken with action, not just words. The air between them shifted, lighter now, filled with a fragile connection forged in the fires of exposure and courage. Emma spoke finally, voice low but firm, declaring what had been long overdue, the walls of secrecy crumbling. North Vale no longer has room for violence and deceit, she said, each word deliberate, echoing through the room. Her mother's eyes glistened, a single tear tracing the line of a cheek, unspoken forgiveness passing silently. Emma reached out, hand extended, allowing her mother to take it, a bridge built from understanding rather than blame. Her mother's grip was tentative at first, then firm, holding back years of fear in a single, shared gesture of trust. They stood together, mother and daughter, in a quiet alliance that neither had dared imagine before this day. The room felt different, transformed, no longer a prison of past horrors, but a space for acknowledgement and truth. Emma realized the victory was more than professional or strategic. It was deeply personal, a reclaiming of self and family. Her mother spoke at last, voice trembling. "I should have spoken sooner, I should have protected you more." Emma shook her head, squeezing her mother's hand, understanding that survival had been her mother's only shield. "We move forward now," Emma said simply, a statement of fact and intent, not a plea or an apology. Her mother nodded again, relief softening her expression, the weight of past complicity lifted slightly in acknowledgement. The room held a stillness that was not empty, but full of possibility, of futures no longer dictated by fear. Emma felt the shift inside herself, a release of tension she hadn't known was possible, the quiet exhale of triumph. She stepped back slightly, giving space, letting the moment settle, allowing both of them to breathe freely. Her mother stayed for a long moment, witnessing the strength Emma had cultivated, the courage that had carried them here. Finally, Emma turned toward the door, hand still loosely holding her mother, a gesture of connection and continuity. Her mother followed, a quiet shadow, walking with her daughter through the threshold of an ending and a beginning. The door closed softly behind them, a sound final and symbolic, marking the conclusion of fear and silence. They walked forward together, each step an affirmation, each breath a reclamation of voice, power, and choice. The room remained behind them, silent now, but its echoes carried the story of courage, resilience, and the breaking of cycles. Emma glanced at her mother once more, nodding gently, and felt the certainty of their shared strength, unshakable and enduring. Together, they stepped into the light beyond the hallway, leaving the past behind and moving toward freedom and clarity. The moment Emma's words echoed, applause erupted, sudden and overwhelming, filling the room like a storm. Hands clapped, voices cheered, a collective release of tension that had built for far too many years. Employees rose from their seats, clapping in unison, some laughing, some wiping tears from their eyes. The sound spilled into hallways, corridors, offices, every corner alive with acknowledgement and relief. Reporters snapped photos, microphones captured voices, cameras rolled, broadcasting the triumph beyond the walls. Emma stood still, absorbing it all, letting the energy wash over her, letting justice resonate through every sound. Her mother stood beside her, quietly smiling, a hand resting lightly on Emma's arm, present and proud. The room felt cleansed, as if the truth had purged it of the weight and fear that once lingered heavily. Emma turned, walking toward the door, each step deliberate, each movement marking closure and renewal. She passed her mother, a silent nod exchanged, a shared acknowledgement of survival and courage. The door closed softly behind them, a quiet punctuation to a chapter steeped in shadows and deceit. Outside, light fell through windows, warm and steady, a new day greeting them unburdened and free. Emma exhaled, a slow release, knowing the past was behind her and the future was finally hers to shape. The echoes of applause lingered, fading gradually, leaving behind a sense of justice, victory, and collective relief. She walked forward, hand in hand with her mother, stepping into the world renewed, unafraid, and unbound.